Welcome back to the Den. It is Porter here, and we have a huge draft weekend coming up with the Labor Day holiday. So I wanted to just give you some quick tips. If you're a beginner to Dynasty, if you are brand new and you're just wondering of some guidelines to keep in mind throughout your draft, these are the tips that I kind of implement and the rules that I have when I am drafting a new team. And the first one might feel very simple here, but I promise that this is important. My first rule or piece of advice I have for you is to understand your league settings. I know this probably goes without saying, but I have been in multiple drafts before where it's either very clear by the way someone drafts or even just questions they're asking that they're understanding the rules too late for it to, where it actually does impact their strategy. The very first startup I did was in 2021, and a friend of ours in our league, took Christian McCaffrey with the first overall pick. He was the clear consensus number one in redraft, and then the 5 picks after that were all quarterbacks. So he puts in the chat, you know, why is everyone drafting quarterbacks? Just didn't understand what like a super flex league was. So really, whatever the rules are in your app, make sure you're reading them. And if there's something that does not make sense, ask your commissioner. Dynasty, the language is so much different than redraft. You of course have your super flex leagues where a super flex spot allows you to start a quarterback, running back, wide receiver, or tight end in that spot. So pretty much quarterback becomes heavily valued in those leagues since you can start two. There's also tight end premium leagues where tight ends either get a bonus, usually it's just half a point or a full point in some leagues per catch. So in those formats, tight ends take a nice bump. Also in Dynasty, a lot of leagues are going to have what's called a taxi squad, which is usually a group of 3 extra roster spots that you have where you can put rookies that you don't think will produce right away, or even in some cases, you can put year 2 players onto your taxi squad. So these are the types of things that you should understand before you draft, and not after round 1 goes by and all the quarterbacks are gone and you had the 101 and, took a running back or something else. So it's just really important that you know what your scoring is and that you do your research accordingly based on those settings. And hopefully you have a commissioner that if you are in a group with people who are new to Dynasty, that they're kind of explaining some of these things along the way. Or if you're using an app like Sleeper, you can always just go into the settings and you'll have scoring settings in your league where you can just review everything that's happening there. But you don't want to go into your draft with a disadvantage at all. So just really make sure you understand what things mean. And if you don't, that you're asking your commissioner to clarify any items that don't make sense to you. And my second piece of advice, and I do understand that fantasy is so much about upside in some cases, but I think that's actually more true in redraft. So my second tip, the second guideline that I like to follow is I really do like to eliminate risk early on in my draft. There are plenty of opportunities later in your draft where you can take shots at players that you believe in. But what I don't want to do is take a ton of like high risk, high reward type assets early on in my draft where there's the off chance that none of them hit. And now I've just wasted, my first 4 startup picks on players that I thought would be good and they just weren't. We're at such a good time in the NFL where there are so many good, productive young players who have already proven it. So those are the types of guys I'm taking usually in the first, I'd say 6 to 7 rounds. I really only want like one risky pick. If it's like a player I really believe in, I'm not telling you to avoid your guys, but just surround them with stability. So for example, players who are going in the same range, you have Marvin Harrison, Lad McConkey, Jackson Smith, and Jigba. Okay. Of that group of 3 that they all kind of go in the 3rd round, I'm pretty much avoiding Marvin Harrison every single time. It's not because I don't think he can be a good player. It's not because I think he had some terrible rookie year. He didn't. He was fine. It's just there is still something that has to be proven to us with Marvin Harrison, whether that's the situation, whether that's the speed and athleticism. That's just not the type of player I would want to take with my round 3 pick, because if that pick does bust, I don't have a good asset there to move, and that can really kill your dynasty team. And I'm saying this from experience because my first startup draft, My round 3 pick in a super flex league was Trey Lance. This was his rookie season. 49ers moved up. They gave up 3 first round picks to go get him. Kyle Shanahan system. I thought he was the absolute future of the team, and I was so confident in that. And he looked good in preseason. Like there were good reports early on, and then eventually he had an injury. But that completely killed my build. Having that volatile asset so early on, and luckily I've been able to recover that team and turn it into more of a contender. But you can get set back so far. And again, if you believe in Marvin Harrison, that's fine. And I say you can take him. Just don't pair him up with other risky picks. Like let's say you take Marvin Harrison, and then on the way back you need a quarterback too. Like Cam Ward, someone who like we don't know if he'll be good. He looks good in the preseason. He's the number 1 overall pick. But I'm trying to avoid that kind of build, if that makes sense. Where I don't want, you know, Cam Ward and Marvin Harrison and Xavier Worthy, like all these guys who still have a lot to prove. I just think there's way too much risk there. So I'm going to go with the more stable options. And it's not like guys like Ladd or JSN are like don't have the same upside as Marvin Harrison. See, I don't necessarily understand that argument that, sticking in this example, that he just has this upside that those players don't. I mean, they both had top 15 wide receiver seasons last year. Like they could easily improve upon that in their careers. So I'm staying pretty simple with my pick. I'm taking young players that are good and have proven. And then later in my draft, kind of after round 7, and I know the direction that my team has, then I'll start taking some flyers on players that need to prove more to me or rookies. But I want that solid young core that I know I'm going to have a very good floor every single week. I know that I've protected assets for the future, and then I can fill in the gaps later on in my draft. But if there's a guy you want, like I said, take them in one of those rounds. Just make sure you're not doing that every single round. And then the third guideline that I try to follow is by working with tiers. I usually just make my own tier lists of players. I have some on this channel, but you can do this on your own, or just look at your favorite fantasy content creators, kind of see how they value players. And working with tiers is also just so important for rookies. So this is kind of 2 pieces of advice in one, but let's just start with the tier-based drafting. I know this trend is become so popular in fantasy football, but instead of just having a ranking of players in order, also group your players into different tiers. So instead of just saying, Jamar Chase is number 1, Justin Jefferson is number 2, and CeeDee Lamb's number 3, maybe to you, all 3 of those players you value the same way. You value those as just elite players that you want to build around. So put those 3 in a tier. And the benefit of working in your tier-based rankings is it just makes the drafting process so much easier, where you can wait on, if you know someone in your tier, you feel like they're going to drop. Like for example, I have Garrett Wilson and I have Chris Olave in the same tier in my rankings. You don't have to agree with that. But that's just how I have them. So for me, if I'm drafting, I don't feel a need to take Garrett Wilson in round 3, round 4, when I know I can get Olave in round 5, round 6, when I value them similarly. So you have way more wiggle room to get value if you decide kind of going into your draft what those tiers look like. And I think this is really important as well with rookie value. If you're doing a startup now at this point in the offseason, I'm kind of assuming that all of the rookies are just in the player pool that you are drafting in. And I think one of the hardest things to grasp if you're a newer Dynasty player is knowing what those rookies are worth, because they're just mixed in this player pool. We don't know that much about them. There might be a lot of names that you're not familiar with if you're jumping into a startup draft coming from the redraft world. So it's important that you do some research. Look at rookie rankings specifically. I've gone in the past and just doing a Google search of looking at rookie draft ADP from previous years, even dating back to 2015, just because it gives you a really clearer picture of what rookie picks are actually worth. And every league is going to set the market differently of what first round picks are worth, what second round picks are worth. But in order for you to kind of understand how to even evaluate that, you need to understand what those picks have turned into. So I did a startup, for example, where everyone's really highly valuing first round picks right now. Yet in the same league, they let Ashton Genty, who was the clear 101 in rookie drafts, fall to the third round, uh, where I picked him up. So it's like those two things kind of contradict, where it's like we think first round picks are the end all be all, but at the same time, rookies who were heavily valued as first round picks like didn't get prioritized early in the draft. So really, it just you need to kind of understand where rookies go. Who are some players that have gone in the first round and the second round? Like, just last season, Caleb Williams was the clear 101. Marvin Harrison was the clear 102. And then Jaden Daniels, Malik Neighbors were kind of up for grabs at 103. And you would have been much happier with those later picks. Or you'll kind of see when you look at the historical data that second round picks don't hit as much. Like even your first round picks only kind of have like a 50% hit rate for fantasy. So just familiarize yourself. I'm not telling you exactly how to value these picks. I just want you to make sure you are informed and that you have the understanding of where players are ranked, what players have gone where in past drafts, so that you can understand based in your league market how you should value those picks. So for example, right after the NFL draft, myself and I know a lot of dynasty creators had Travion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins very much in the same tier for rookie drafts, kind of looking at that 106, 107 range of your draft. Of course, there's plenty of people who are higher on one or the other, or even like lower on one or the other. But these two had very similar draft capital. They had very different profiles, but both showed up in big ways with like their production and combine and athleticism results. And they both went to good situations where Quinshon Judkins specifically kind of should have been in this workhorse role, where Travion Henderson we knew would be more in a split backfield, but get some very meaningful touches and usage in the passing game. So these two guys were just one pick apart in the majority of rookie drafts. And now a few months later, obviously the Quinshon Judkins situation has made him fall quite a bit, and Travion Henderson's performance in the preseason and just all the positive things we're seeing with him, he's really skyrocketed in his ADP. So what's interesting though is that these two guys who were so clearly to a lot of us in the same tier now go like 3, 4, 5 rounds apart in your draft. So that's like just another way to attack that value. I'm very excited. I just got Quinshon Judkins in round 8 of a startup draft. That's the latest I've seen him go. And in that same draft, Travion Henderson went round 3. So again, two rookies that if you just isolated the rookie class right after the NFL draft, so obviously a lot has happened since then, but two players that we kind of viewed in the same tier have now fallen very much far. So I'll take that value all day over taking a Travion Henderson in the third, knowing I can get that value much later. So work with tiers and really understand what those rookies are worth specifically, because you're going to get a ton of rookie value in these drafts if you're not reaching. Another situation was Cam Scatterbo went like 3 or 4 rounds ahead of Bashal Tutin in a startup I just did, even though those two guys, for me all offseason, have been one pick apart in rookie drafts. So it's great to get the cheaper option so you can have that value, which is exactly our next guideline, which is Dynasty is so much different than redraft, where yes, you can trade in your redraft leagues, but it's just a much more important part of the Dynasty game. So when you are drafting, you kind of have to get out of that redraft mindset where you're not worried about filling a roster. You're worried about attacking value. You want the most valuable assets on your Dynasty team, and you need to understand that you can fix your roster later. So if you leave a draft and you're loaded at quarterback and receiver, and maybe your running back room is a little bit weak, that's okay. You can trade, hopefully, depending on your league market, but you can go fill that need from a team that maybe went a little bit running back heavy, that missed out on other positions. So I'm not too concerned with filling my roster for this season. I always definitely future thinking. I usually kind of just think within that 1 to 3 year window, which is pretty common. I think common advice in Dynasty. You want players that are good now, but you think still have a couple years left in them. But I would still rather have like just the better players that are going to be worth more. Like quarterbacks are worth a ton in Dynasty, receivers are worth a ton in Dynasty. So kind of pairing this with my earlier guideline of, playing it safe with those first 6, 7 round picks, Usually I'm drafting running back later because I know I can get value. I can build like a loaded receiver room and maybe get one of the elite tight ends and get two good quarterbacks. And then I'm fine starting like Tony Pollard and Aaron Jones and James Conner in my running back spots later, as opposed to trying to fill my roster and get those guys early. And then now I have like a really just team that doesn't have a lot of value in the pieces that I've built around it. So get your young core, and then later on just fill value and just know that you can make trades to build out the perfect team. And this may not be true in every single league, but in the leagues that I have been in, it really seems quarterbacks are very difficult to trade for. So especially in super flex, we're speaking specifically. So those player quarterbacks are just worth a ton. So don't let those slip too far, especially like the good young quarterbacks that we know are going to be elite options every year. And same with receivers. Receivers are just worth a ton. They're really the top end guys. Like if you wanted to go acquire a Justin Jefferson, you're going to have to probably give up like 3 first-round picks to get a player of that caliber. Whereas I've kind of just noticed that running backs and tight ends specifically usually have less of a market value, and they can be easier to trade for. Although in tight end premiums, tight end's a little more of an asset. But running back specifically, there's going to be bad teams in your league that need to start thinking about the future. And, a lot of times it's easy to acquire those older running backs. So again, just attack the value, take the best players on the board using your tier rankings, and you can always fine tune your roster. I know if you're drafting now, like the season starts Thursday, so this might seem like bad advice because you do have to play games Thursday, but I promise there's going to be excitement, and you can trade and fix things. And if you're weak at one position going into the season, your team could be drastically different a few weeks from now. So just always keep that in mind. And then the final guideline that I like to follow is, first of all, you have to lock in for those later rounds. Again, if you're newer to Dynasty, you might start to get a little nervous when you're in round 20 and you don't recognize the players. But my advice for the later rounds, you just stay focused. Don't just like auto pick or, just pick what ADP says. What I'm looking for is I'm looking for either one of two things. It's situational upside as opposed to talent upside, or it's stability. So it's one of those two things. So, for example, like Spencer Rattler, he's a starting quarterback in the NFL right now. He was named the starter. So there's some upside there. You don't have to necessarily believe in Spencer Rattler, the talent. You can think he's bad. That's totally fine. But you have to acknowledge that a player like him in the round 20s of your startup, there is still a world where he's good. I'm not saying you have to believe it or you think it's likely to happen. It's just this sport is unpredictable. What if he comes in and Kellen Moore is, can scheme things up really well for him, and this starting quarterback position ends up being a really valuable role. Or maybe if you're on the side where you believe more in Tyler Shuck, get them both, and now you've locked down a quarterback room. So you've given your roster situational upside, even if you don't believe as much in the players. Same with Daniel Jones. Like, I was looking at some startup results from that first one I mentioned in 2021 where Sam Darnold went in like round 23, 24, and look how he's kind of turned his career around. So maybe that could be Daniel Jones. Maybe he does really well in Indianapolis and gets a chance somewhere else after this year. You just do not know. And sometimes it's humbling to just kind of have to tell yourself that as confident as you are in the takes that you have and the opinions you have, still anything can happen in this sport. So I'm avoiding players where I like don't see situational upside. So like a Michael Wilson is an example, someone that sure will probably be like a starting wide receiver in the NFL, but I'm not seeing like any fantasy production coming out of that. So I'd much rather take like Spencer Rattler, like if he were on the board. Same with running backs. At the final rounds, you can get a ton of running backs who maybe they're not going to contribute this year, but they could be handcuffs this year, like a Taj Brooks in Cincinnati. Or, is there a chance that they could play like, let's try to think like a Devin Neal in New Orleans, where maybe if Alvin Kamara is done soon, like maybe he finds his way into a starting role. So when you're kind of looking at those depth chart guys, like the handcuff running backs, you're attacking their situational upside. You're not really evaluating them as players. You're just thinking, who do I think can get an opportunity in the situation they are in. So if I'm viewing a player that I think doesn't have that, then in those later rounds, I'm avoiding them. And then on the flip, I want to balance those situational upside picks with the stability picks. And the stability picks, like if we're in the late rounds, these are older players that everyone has kind of just written off, because I do think when people get into a draft, there's like the overemphasis on thinking about the future, that any old players are just useless. But that, I don't think that's true in the later rounds. Like, go take Keenan Allen, go take Travis Kelce, like these players where, yeah, you're probably only getting a year of production out of them, or like an Adam Thielen who's now in Minnesota. Like, yes, there's not a lot left there, but what they're going to do for you this season is probably more helpful for your team than a lot of the players that are going around them. So usually with those last picks, I'm kind of alternating or just really balancing situational upside or veteran stability that like the rest of my league just is staying away from. I'm happy to capitalize there every time. And I mentioned this with the quarterbacks, but this is true with the running backs. Like, going back to the situational upside, like take two assets and just like let it play out. Like, right, take both Saints quarterbacks. Take Nick Chubb and Woody Marks and see what happens. Take Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt and Austin Eckler, right? Like, lock down these situations where you're at least going to have someone produce for your team this season. And I think that that's so important with the later rounds. Like, Travis Kelce will score more this season than basically a lot of the players around him will for their whole careers in the NFL. So you cannot overlook that. And when it's late, give yourself some flexibility with those older players, and you can figure out the rest later. So if you are drafting, good luck to you. I hope that these guidelines can help a little bit, put you in the right mindset as you attack your drafts this weekend. I'll be around. So if you are in the middle of a draft, or, you're deciding between two players, or you want some help building your roster, definitely leave a comment on this video. I'll get the notification so I can try to respond to you as quickly as I can. If you're in like a slow draft, hopefully I can get you some advice pretty quickly if you need it, or you just need someone to blame when I tell you to take the wrong player. But enjoy the draft weekend. I'm so excited for the NFL season. This has been a really fun off season. Got a lot of content planned for week 1. So thanks for checking out the video, and I will see you